to find our way to a seat anywhere in the room at any table. No assigned seating. That would be great. School board members, your seating is not assigned either. Just so you know. So as folks are finding their seats, I'm just going to start us off talking about what we're going to do this evening, or what we're going to try to do this evening. I think we're going to succeed. So this meeting will follow a few different steps. It's got a few different components. We're going to be sharing with you a little bit about our board and our role and sort of our work. We're going to be sharing goals about community engagement and the role community engagement has with our board, and we're going to have some facilitated small group work that will focus on some elements that we're thinking about with values as we go into the budget. We're also going to have, I think I skipped over that, a brief budget presentation to kind of set the scene for where we are. Budget development season is right around the corner, and so this meeting is in part focused on that topic. So really just briefly, I want to invite school board members around the room to stand and introduce yourself by name, maybe the town you're from. And I'll start. I'm Caleb Elder, and I'm from Starksboro, and one of the two members on the MAUSD board from Starksboro. And maybe we'll just kind of work around the room this way, and school board members
Could bring a mic to people.
can stand and deliver, and I will bring the
Speak
mic
up.
and we'll pass it around.
Oh, just I can talk loud. Just speak up.
I'm Liz Sayre, and I'm from Bristol.
Karen Lathrop, and I'm also from Bristol. Sarah Blake from Lincoln. Allison Sturman, Bristol. Dawn Griswold from Moncton.
Steve Rooney from Starksboro. Kevin Hansen from Bristol.
Hi, I'm Krista Seringo from Bristol.
Andrew Morton from New Haven.
Amy Heath from Lincoln. And Jen Stanley from Moncton.
Okay. Well, thank you. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sue McCormick. She is going to be our facilitator for this evening. We're really appreciative she's able to help us with this work, and look forward to continuing this work even after tonight's meeting as well. So I'll turn it over, and here's Sue.
Hi everyone, I'm Sue McCormick, and I'm so happy to be with you tonight. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I have this great job. My job is to design and facilitate community conversations, and it's a really interesting time to be doing that right now. I've been doing this work for almost 20 years, and for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been doing a lot of work with school districts around New England, helping school boards and school leaders really build their capacity to engage effectively with the communities that they serve. And it's been very rewarding work. We've had a lot of success getting students engaged and making sure that important decisions that schools are making are connected to the things that matter to the communities that the schools are in. So I'm really happy to be here. A couple of weeks ago, I got together with some folks on the MAUSD engagement committee, and also we had some representatives from the 5 town community forums too, and they helped us think about what kind of design we wanted to try for this meeting tonight. And it was really great to meet with the board. They are very intentional about wanting to have really good ways to engage with the community, and so we're hoping this night is off to a good start. This is a little bit of an experiment for this fairly new board, and so at the end of the meeting, we're definitely going to give you a chance to weigh in and give us some feedback about whether this was a useful way to do this work. So thank you for being here. And I want to, oh, excuse me, that's actually, that's a rookie error that I don't normally make, but let me turn it off so that doesn't happen again the rest of the night. When cell phones first came out, I was at a conference with about 700 people in the room, and the presenter got a call and he actually took it in the middle of his presentation and just had a phone conversation, so forgive me for that. I just want to get a sense of who's in the room, so I want to start. I don't think we have students in the room. Are there any students in the room tonight? Okay. How about people, how about community members who don't currently have children in the schools? Do you want to stand so we can just get a sense? That's fantastic. How about parents who do have children currently in the school? How about educators and school staff? Great, so there's a really nice mix of people in the room, and that will bode well for our conversations. So as Caleb said, we're going to do a couple of different things tonight. We're going to start with a little bit of opening discussion, and I'm going to give you a chance to talk with a partner a little bit. And then we're going to have some folks from the Community Engagement Committee talk a little bit about some of their hopes around engaging with the community. Then we'll have a brief budget presentation, and then a really important part of the night is we're going to have some small group conversations to give you all a chance to talk a little bit about what matters to you and what are some of your values and priorities when it comes to the budget. And after that conversation, we're going to have a way for you to offer some feedback to the board. So that's the arc of the evening. Okay? And I want to invite you to start with an opening discussion. And I'm going to ask you to reflect for a minute on these questions, and then I'm going to ask you to actually get up and find somebody to have this conversation with, and preferably someone that maybe you don't know so well. The reason we're starting with this conversation is, of course, school districts are about students, and so we want to start by talking about young people to really ground the rest of the evening in something that's really important. So before you talk, I just want to give you a chance to get your thoughts together. So I want you to, first of all, take a minute and get into your mind a very important young person in your life. It can be a child, a neighbor, somebody who you teach, a student of yours. And when we pair up, I'm going to give you a few minutes to briefly describe the person you're thinking of. And then I want you to think about, these are very broad questions. Given the times that we're living in right now, what are you excited about for this young person? What are some opportunities that you think that they have? And then what are some concerns that you have? And then finally, how do you hope this young person's school experiences will help prepare them? So I'll give you a minute to find someone to talk with, and I'll give you a couple of minutes, and what I'd like to do is just have one person be the talker and one person be the listener, and I'll let you know when it's time to change so that both people can have a chance to share their stories. share some highlights of some of your conversations. People seem really into what they were talking about.
One was gender equality. Concerned about gender equality and what schools are. And the other was about the environment and climate change, those kind of things. And another thing that came up in our conversation was talking about these are really getting to our values and how will these show up in our thoughts about money? You know, like that seems like a big jump, but it seems like a very important jump. You know, so that was interesting to think about that together.
We talked about the worry of kids not growing up understanding how the environment is degrading right now, or that was a big worry that I have, and a hope that more awareness and accountability for what's going on, and also personalized learning and giving kids opportunities to pursue personal goals and personal interests.
One of the big points that my partner and I talked about was the concern of some of the social challenges that kids are facing today. And kids come from a variety of backgrounds, and they need a lot of different support systems. And that is a need that has, been exemplified and that, we're both concerned about.
Thank you.
We talked about when kids feel safe and secure in their learning environment, they do their best and take risks, important risks.
What happens to the young person who needs to move their body and needs to be confined in a room? What are the alternatives? Another idea about school being not an end point, but like a springboard. It needs to be places for people to move beyond and not to be prejudged.
We talked about the concerns about the impact of social media and how overwhelming technology has become in the schools as well as outside of the schools.
Well, thanks for starting us off with that conversation, and I do want to invite you to make that, keep these conversations that you started with in mind as we go through the rest of the evening, because of course, our young people are what this whole thing is all about, and so we want to keep those at the front of our minds. And if we're thinking about opportunities and challenges, it helps us a lot when we start to talk about the nuts and bolts about what we're delivering and how, okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it back over for a minute to Krista and Caleb, I think, and they're going to talk a little bit about their role running forward.
Okay. Grab my notes. Okay. So we're going to just kind of cover a little bit for the presentation about the general role of our board, just because we feel like that's always good to reemphasize, and then how the work of community engagement fits into our board and kind of how that dovetails with the rest of our work. And so I will be handling the first part of that. I'm not going to read verbatim a lot of these bullet points because that never seems like a good thing. But essentially, the board work, this is what we call a policy governance board. It's something that we hear about a lot when we're coming on as new board members. It's something that we, I think, sometimes talk a certain amount about over the past couple years, and it's, or maybe that's just since I've come on board. I talk about policy governance a lot when I talk about board work, to try to explain how it is that that works. So, and essentially it's kind of framed with some of these bullet points behind us, but to kind of speak through that a little bit more. We are coming up with a set of goals, essentially. And we need input for those goals. We need to make sure that those goals, which we call ends policies, resonate with our community's objectives and our educational goals and kind of what we need to do. And then we need to also, on the back end, figure out whether those goals are being met. The middle part is where we hire the professional staff, the superintendent and his team, to basically come up with the means for those goals and to report on how they're being achieved, both through, of course, our budget, which is a statement of intention and value that we come up with every year and pass at the local level, but also then in terms of the educational plan. And it's really a year-long system of measuring against those goals. And I think ultimately having the flexibility to adapt those goals as necessary. And I don't want to take too much of kind of what Chris is going to be talking about, but I will say that we formed the community engagement subcommittee. This is something that we knew we would do, but we formed that when the new board came into being. And I am currently the chair of that subcommittee. And so our work is really to, particularly in the post-merger world, we've got a new board structure. So there were some community engagement practices that were happening under the old boards, and there were 6 of them. And now that there's one, we kind of need to establish a kind of baseline for what we're going to do and to figure out what works. And so we'll be covering some of that in this presentation. But we have formed a community engagement committee. We meet pretty much monthly, a couple weeks off from the main board meetings. And those meetings do provide a nice opportunity to talk about ideas in a slightly more free-flowing way than might happen at our board meeting. And that has been really helpful. So this is our first community meeting forum for this new board, and we certainly hope that it's followed up soon by others. But to kind of get into some of the more specifics of our community engagement, I wanted to hand it over to Krista.
Okay, so Caleb and I are 2 of 5 members of the Community Engagement Committee. We're also joined by Liz Sayre and Andrew Morton and Jen Stanley. And when our, I think the clicker, where's that? I just need to go to the next slide. But when our new board formed, we quickly, I think within a few months of our meeting, formed the Community Engagement Committee. As Caleb was saying, a really big part of our role as a school board is engaging with our community, and yet it's often hard for us to find the time to do that work and to do it well. And especially now, as a board representing all of our towns, it seems even more important that we do this work. So you can see on the slide the charge that we agreed upon for this committee. And this event is really the first kind of public venue for us to start doing this work. We talked about having a forum like this for a while, and we're excited to establish a framework that we can use for other opportunities to engage our community. And not just in a forum style, which brings out a good number of folks, but is definitely not the only way to reach our community. So we are really looking for feedback from all of you and from others in the best ways that we can stay connected and help ensure that we're on the right track, or that our district and our administration is on the right track. So I guess before I turn it over to Andrew, who's going to talk a little bit about a survey that this committee did starting out, I would just say, please, as you leave, you'll have an opportunity to give us feedback about how this event went and what you'd like to see for future engagements. So we look forward to hearing that from you. So I guess we can go to the next slide, whoever has the magic clicker.
Do you want this, Andrew, or do you want
You can click away.
Okay. There you go.
So again, I'm Andrew Morton from New Haven. So when the committee got together, we decided that we wanted to reach out to the community to find out what the community would like. We all had great ideas, but we didn't know if that just was us and other people would agree. So we put out some survey questions late, so it's been about a year ago, November, December timeframe, Front Porch Forum, various media channels. Those are the questions. I won't read them aloud while you read them. Okay. So we asked those questions. We got 207 responses. I don't know if that's a lot of responses in the context of other surveys that the boards have put out, but that's what we got and that's what we had to work with. And then we also allow people a blank box to just fill in with whatever else they wanted to address if we didn't ask it in the questions. And boy, did we get some responses. Sometimes they were short novellas. And then my job was to sort of go through and try to code what it was I was seeing, which was also difficult because I would hear, you should engage people with email. Don't engage people with email. Have meetings on weekends. Don't have them on the weekends. You should have food. Don't have food. You should have childcare. So it was a lot to sort of code. All right, so the next slide. So that's what, is this working now?
Maybe, what color is the button?
It's green. It's working? No.
No.
No? No? It's a bit temperamental. Okay. So this is what we came up with. This was the easier results to see visually on our Survey Monkey, which was that people like surveys, and of course we understood that there may be some sampling bias when we say, take this online survey, what do you like? Online surveys. But we'll start there. Then press releases and newsletters, people like to get those, and then facilitated discussion like we had tonight. And so part of our process was like, so is this the way we're going to do it? And thought, no, probably what we should do is use this to get to here tonight, and then from tonight we'll figure out what we want to do from there. Okay. Temperamental again. Temperamental. So surveys, newsletters, conversations. And that people really, so this was the other thing. I think it's great to meet in all the different towns, as long as you come to my town. No, we should meet in other towns. So this is what we decided that we would move it around. I mean, that seemed appropriate because we unified. So when you think about it, it's like one big town with 5 different campuses. Okay. Okay. That's it for me. So that's back to our facility.
So I wanted to ask the folks who were describing community engagement about, written into the Artists' Agreement when we all came together in one district was a provision that called for town-based community advisory councils, which personally I thought was a good idea, but it's also in the agreements, and I was wondering about the status of that. I had been hoping that it would be kind of in place before this budget cycle, but I think it would be helpful, but I just wondering what the status of that was.
It's not working.
So in the Articles of Agreement, it was worded, I believe, that we contemplate structures to help make the connection between communities and individual schools to sustain that connection, even now as we have this one unified board. And we haven't figured out yet what that looks like, and school councils were proposed as one idea. And we've talked about it at different board meetings, and it's complex, and it's something that definitely warrants further discussion, and we've even contemplated perhaps an event like this or other ways to get feedback from people in this idea. Some of us, we heard at our retreat a great presentation on best practices for school councils. So we have some great information that we can reflect on and refer to. But I think it's a really big conversation that would be really well served if it involved lots of people in our community, so we can figure out together what makes the most sense. No decision has been made yet.
So, I love this. This is a great forum, and I appreciate you guys putting it together, because I know it takes work to plan and organize. But, Brad and I were just talking about how it does seem like, that there are similar faces that come, which is a great thing, but it's also a challenge. And one thing I know I've talked to some other friends about is I'd love to have some kind of space and time to brainstorm how do we reach the people who don't love to come to meetings and who we want to hear what they have to say, kind of broaden our community engagement in a way that we have more people on board.
Hi, I just have to mention, I appreciate this effort, but this is up against the cider and donut concert at the high school. And so there are 500 adults at the high school, and I know a bunch of them would really like to be here, but their kids are performing, so they're there. So I would really hope the next time we think of this, that we take a second to look at the calendars of the schools that are happening, and don't butt up against a major event that happens. And I think you'll see a much greater turnout. I mean, there's people who want to be here, but they have to be chosen.
So we're going to continue on now, and I'm going to invite Jen to come up, and she's going to give kind of a brief high-level overview of what happens and how a budget gets constructed for this district.
Thanks, Sue. I think you might have overstated. It's going to be budget development in 10 minutes or less, so it's going to be very high level. I think that really the intention was that we asked you to come here to talk a little bit about the budget, so we felt like we needed to introduce just very little bit at least about how the budget comes together and some of the things that we think about. So that's really the focus. I'm not going to be going over numbers and figures like you maybe have seen at other meetings. So I wanted to start by talking about our ends policy, which is really policy governance speak for the goals. The goals. The goals? The goals? Okay. The goals that we hope to accomplish through our school system. And we did pass out some handouts, nothing that you're required to look at, but we did hand out the ends policy. So there's copies of that on your tables, as well as a few of the slides that I'm going to show. So if you want to look at those, I'd encourage you to do so. But I do want to just read the kind of first introduction to the ends policy, because it is really our guiding principle of what we're trying to accomplish. So our school system exists to educate the children of Mount Abraham Unified School District so that they can meet the challenges of lifelong learners and responsible citizens at a cost deemed acceptable by the community. Further, the board is committed to equity and outcomes for each student. And it says more than that, but I couldn't fit it all on the slides, so you can read it on the handouts. The ends policy is broken out into 3 major sections. So there's core subjects, that's like your math, science, English, that kind of stuff, in a digital and global environment. There's life and career skills and learning and innovation. And so at the core of any budget that we put forward, we need to keep those ends in mind, because that is what we are trying to accomplish at our schools. So the other thing that comes into the mix is that there's a lot of pressures that we have to consider when we think about a budget. And some of those pressures are trying to push the budget up, and other pressures are trying to push the budget down. You've probably heard a lot in the past year or two about pressures from the governor's office to try to really control spending at our schools, as well as just lots of things that there's a lot of talk about declining enrollment as well. And on the flip side, we have pressures like things cost more. Things at my house cost more every year. So just to do the same things we do every year, it does cost more. So we're trying to balance those as we think about the budget. So I'm not going to read you this quote, but you maybe saw it. I know we saw it a couple times last year during budget development. And I really just want to remind us that we're in a period of change. This is the first year right now when we are unified school in one budget. So that itself is a big change. And we also have seen some changes in the past, or in this current budget, with kind of how we're doing our instruction and some of the staffing approaches. So you may have feelings about those. So this is a period of change, and we are working through that change and hoping to see some of the benefits of that as we move forward. Maybe the microphone likes this slide better. So this slide is in the handout on your table. This is something that the central office put together last year as part of our budget development, and I really like it. It's a picture of the money that gets spent on an equalized pupil, which is kind of, imagine it like an average student with a lot of math that happens in the background. But basically, it's a breakout of the money that's getting spent for a student and the different areas of that spending. So you can see the largest area, of course, is the instruction and support, as we would expect, but there are some other really important factors that go into the budget as well. So the next section looks at the roles in budget development. And this is really important because you're all part of the community. We asked you to come here to talk to us about budget development. So of course there's a really important role for the community in budget development. So we ask for your input thinking about priorities as we go into the budget. There will be, I believe, at least one more forum on the budget in the coming months. And then of course you'll get to vote on it in March, which is a really important part of it as well. So in addition to that, the school board will be reviewing the draft budgets over the coming months, thinking about priorities as well, and hopefully reaching something that is an acceptable budget to the community. And we are required to adopt a budget by January, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. And lastly, there's a role for the administration. So that's the superintendent and the staff, as well as the principals and the staff within the schools. And they're working to identify what the needs are and to put together those draft budgets and then refine those based on both information that we're getting from the state, feedback from the community, from the board, and from other channels. Okay, one more slide. We're going to talk about the budget development timeline, and this one is also in your handout if it's too small or if you want to look at it closer up. So basically, a lot of our budget development work happens between October and March, with most of that effort really happening between October and January. So this month, the board will be establishing a budget target. That's kind of a guideline for the administration for how much of an increase or not increase we might be interested in considering for the coming budget. Then in November and December and January, there will be a lot of work by the administration, as I mentioned, to work with the school staff and the principals to understand kind of what the needs are and to actually put that budget together. And the school board will look at those budgets, those drafts over that timeline as well. I mentioned before, the school board does have to adopt a budget in January, and that's because of the rules for when things have to be warned for the vote. So by not quite the end of January, like late January, we have to have a final budget that will go to the vote. And then obviously there was the vote in March.
Does the strategic plan, my question is whether the strategic plan that was developed last year among the community and teachers, will that be used to inform the budget?
That's a really great question. I personally wasn't involved in the strategic planning process, but my understanding is that that would certainly, it's defining additional goals for the schools, and I'm certain that that does factor into the budget development.
Okay. You mentioned something about, I think in early January, where there'll be meetings at schools. Is that what you said, Jen? To get information from staff and teachers about needs for the year, is that right?
So it's my understanding that through November and December, and perhaps in January, but probably a bit earlier in the cycle, is when the superintendent would be working with the principals and they would be working with the staff to understand the needs in the schools.
So I had this, sorry, there was part two. That was my first.
So I guess I would just, it feels like that's going to be a huge opportunity to kind of assess what's happened with the changes that have been put in place at the schools this year. I mean, everyone knows that there have been some pretty major changes. I was happy to hear that you mentioned that, Jen, about reduced staffing, reduced support staff, an increase in coaching, larger class sizes. There's definitely been some big changes, so I just would hope that there are measures in place as this school year progresses to assess, how is this going? What's happening with our teachers, what's happening with our students? Are kids getting the support they need? And these are hard questions to ask, but I think it's the real stuff.
And so I think that I just urge that whether it's through anecdotal stories from teachers, whether it's concrete data, how many kids are getting help in reading this year? Is it 1 or is it 7? Also, are teachers benefiting from the coaching model? Is there a way to measure that? Is there a way to see, how often are teachers actually, because it's a great idea, but again, it's kind of going back to that data collection. And so I just really hope that there is a system in place for gathering that data so that when we look at the budget for next year, it's not just a shoe-in for what's in place now, and that maybe it is. Maybe it's working fine and we do shoe it in for next year. Or maybe as we gather data and look at, the real thing about how it's really manifesting itself, we say, oh gosh, this isn't working at all, so let's make our budget reflect what we really need. So.
I second that.
So when I'm looking at this pupil here, the equalized pupil, it is mostly blue. And I'm wondering, when I look at that blue, what part of that are people working with kids? So when I think of, I just wonder how misleading that is. If this were out in the public, I'd say, wow, those kids are getting a lot of instruction and a lot of support from adults. And I'm just curious, with the new model, has that shifted? And what percentage of that equalized pupil is actually meeting with adults? Does that make sense?
I understand your question. I don't have the data to be able to break that out tonight. I'm not sure if perhaps we'll see more of that as we come into the budget development, but this diagram was actually designed based on the current budget year. So it is designed based on the year we're in right now, not last year before the changes happened.
Can I just ask a follow-up? So I guess my question is, where you say instruction and support, do you consider coaches, the coordinators, are they part of instruction and support? Are they part of, so they are part of that?
Yes.
Right. So those people aren't seeing children. So I just want to make that, I just think we need to make that really clear. They're helping teachers, but at the cost of losing more people who are actually working with kids.
So I have, I guess, a procedural question. If you have some concerns about the budget process itself, is now the time to raise that, or should that be left to more small groups?
So if you have concerns about the process, what I would encourage you to do is write them on green paper. And we have a lot more of that green paper, by the way. We can bring some more around. And just write your concern legibly so that people can read it and the board will collect those. Okay?
Is there anywhere to share that with other people?
So I do want to get it so that everybody can have a conversation, but if you have a very quick comment that you would like to share about the procedure, could it be quick?
It's quick, and I don't want to detract from the time yet. I know you did. Last year, the budget process quickly developed, narrowed down to how much should we spend on education. And very little was focused on what sort of program we want. And I would like to see this year's process give a more balanced approach to what sort of educational program we want, as well as how much we want to spend, because they're interrelated.
Guess what? That's exactly what you're going to be talking about at your tables. So that's a good thing. So let's move on to the next part of the evening. And what I want to do, well, first I'm going to do something that's a little unpopular and annoying whenever I work with groups, but there's value in it, so I'm going to do it anyway. You have a really nice mix of people in the room tonight. You have parents, community members, board members, and some educators and school staff. And we're going to have, about an hour to talk to each other. And it would be really great to have the tables be a mix of all of those people, because one of the opportunities here is to hear from people with a variety of perspectives about priorities. So I was wondering if you all would be willing to kind of look around and maybe get up and move around a little bit so that your tables have a nice mix of
People with different roles.
experience possible for everyone. And so here's just a couple of really basic agreements. And if you want to add some at your table, you can. But the first one is just the idea of sharing airtime. So if you're a person and you know that you love to talk and you could talk the whole time, just hold back a little. And if you're quiet, try to put yourself out there so that you can get the benefit of all the wisdom at your table. The second thing is, this isn't about right and wrong. So we want all ideas to get a fair hearing. So if somebody's saying something that just you don't agree with, that's fine, but just try to listen to where they're coming from, okay? For this conversation, we're asking you all to speak for yourself. So if you are a school board member or an educator, during this conversation, you can take that hat off, and you don't have to speak for the full board or all teachers or anything like that. You're just speaking from your own point of view. And then finally, it's fine to disagree. In fact, if there's no disagreement, then it won't be that interesting, but please don't make it personal. So this conversation is going to focus around some different viewpoints that different people might have, some different priorities about the budget. And there's not a right or a wrong view, but some people may feel really differently about it. So before you dive in, I'm going to share with you, thank you. Let's see, it works at the moment. I'm going to share with you, I'm going to go through each of these priorities. There are 7 statements, and I just want to invite you to take a minute. And when you hear each of these statements, I want you to think about them. Is this something that is important to me? Okay? And you can write down some thoughts about them, and you're going to have a chance to talk about them. So here are the statements, and I'm going to go through each of these one at a time and pause so you can think about them. Okay? We need to invest in teachers, salaries, and professional development so our students have high-quality learning experiences. We need to allocate resources in ways that ensure success for all students across the district. We need to invest in our buildings and infrastructure so we have safe, efficient, and inspiring learning environments for our students. We need to contain costs so our education system is affordable for our communities. We need to make a strong investment in our schools so current families and residents want to stay here and we can attract new people and economic investment to our communities. We need to invest in programs and activities so students with different interests have access to different kinds of learning opportunities. Now that we are one district, we need to focus on creating cost savings through better alignment across schools and efficiencies through shared purchasing, etc. So now I'm going to turn it over to your facilitators at your tables, and you're going to have about 35 minutes to have a conversation and share with each other which of these priorities stand out for you. And it's an opportunity for you to hear different perspectives. So if anybody gets stuck at the table and needs help, just let me know and I'll come by and see if I can lend a hand.
So,
To ask someone to make sure that they being spent by
People get together who teach the same subjects or the same grades.
Some of these, there's studies that are going to say, if you invest in schools, these are the results. So that needs to be.
Trying to get your views, like what do you?
Sure, but that's
At this point,
data.
at this point,
I really
Either by, I think primarily by email, but then also finding its way potentially to other publications or ways to share information.
There's a lot of people that are sitting in this room that don't want to spend any money. And there's also people out in the community that think five elementary schools are too many. We don't need five. We need 3 or 2 or 4, something like that.
Yeah, right. Like, how are you going to convince me either orally or in writing that you have the skills as an employer? So that's where I worry. It's like, if it becomes their own world, then how are we able to quality control?
Lincoln, they got together and they really got into doing a new scene at the school, like really outdoor classrooms. The Potato Hill.
And those are transferable skills, you know, and those are the programs that have been eliminated over the last few years. And to me, it's a huge travesty.
It's not happening. But I think it's a very good question. What can we do? What can we do?
Because in the statement you say that that's affordable for the community, that the community, it's like, how do you find that out, right? It's like you try to listen to all the folks and try to get to a place where you think, okay, I'm going to put this out on the table, then I'm really going to hear, but then you're never clear.
Adults can make significant connections to students. To me, that's important. And I sort of heard the importance of it, so.
I think they're connected. Well, they are. I mean, someone's talking about knowing oneself. Coaches. And how do you know yourself if you don't know your place in the larger picture?
So what I would love to do, we have 7 tables, and I think if we're quick, I would love to just hear one brief reflection from each table. If someone wants to just share a highlight, something that really stood out about your conversation. It could be, wow, we all agreed on this one thing, or wow, we all had a lot of those different views, whatever it was, just so we get a sense of kind of where people are at in the meeting. So let's do that quickly.
Yep, go ahead. So one of our themes.
Yeah, a theme would be great.
A theme we had was just about the investment in the community and that it's not just a one-year investment, it's a really long-run investment, I would say, that lasts 20 plus years after they've gone through school. And there's a cost benefit for taxes. Okay.
Yeah, what's working, what isn't working, and make improvements.
And how to assess it.
In a timely manner.
For instance, cost containment or changing the way students are taught and to the detriment maybe of the relationships that they have with personnel in the school, and if they don't see those teachers or those people who are helping the school full time, they're only seeing them part of the day, and that could potentially be affecting the relationship with the personnel.
So we saw the 7 questions as being a kind of a balancing act, obviously, and what seemed to come to the top were some items that were missing. One of them is basically to differentiate investment in teachers into not just salaries and benefits, but the teaching environment itself, making that a better experience for the teachers, and also to allow professional development to be more teacher or team defined rather than mandated from the state.
We felt that number 5 seemed to really be, that talked about strong investment for communities and that sort of thing. It was really a top-level summary of several of the other ones. We had a discussion about that. We also talked quite a bit about number 1, the value of having an engaged staff and giving a quality education. And we did touch upon the fact that there are voices in the community that aren't here tonight, that are sometimes tight with budgets and that sort of thing, and there needs to be an understanding on what their thought process is as well.
I heard some really strong themes actually through this whole evening so far. There's of course a theme that keeps coming up around kind of who's here and who's missing. That's really important, and that's That's work that's never done, and there's lots of ways to try to mitigate that, but it's ongoing work, and it's a real challenge in every community that I ever work in. Another theme that I heard pretty strongly was just this idea of the connection between kind of creating success for all students and personalized learning. And that seemed to come out at several of the tables. A couple of the tables talked about the fact that this is a long-term investment. It sounds like a couple of tables talked about kind of the big picture, looking at the impact of the investment on communities. And then another thing that I heard, and this might be because I'm an outsider that I don't quite understand it, so there may be some recent choices or something that's happened that caused this to come up a lot, but there seems to be some question about kind of the most effective way to support teachers and instruction, and questions around the value of coaching and relationships. So it seems like there was some conversation about how do we best support our teachers in the district so that they can do their best work with students. So those are some of the themes that I heard. Is there anything else that people kind of heard in this?
That the school is really a part of the community, and that there's a lot that the schools are taking on, but there's a lot of need that reflects in our community as a whole, and that we can work together to help mitigate some of those challenges, that the school doesn't need to just own all of that, but that we can work with lots of other groups trying to mitigate some of those issues.
I'd just like to piggyback on that, because anytime teachers come out to these meetings, you have to remember that they're teaching our kids the next day at 7 a.m., and I appreciate any time they come to a meeting and any input they give. So
great appreciation for the teachers who came out tonight. That's awesome. Questions about what it was like to participate in the conversation?
Yeah, we came up with some incredible ideas and sort of like real forward thinking, but my question is like, or just the concern, I guess, is like, now what? There's a lot of talk without power, and so as a community member, I'm sort of concerned, like, we have incredible ideas and we could totally reinvent the school, but what,
So that's a great segue to the next, to the wrap up. And that's always, again, in the work that I do, I'm always working with people who organize these to talk about, before you organize it, how are you going to connect community input with decision making? It's a really important question, right? And so, I'm going to turn it over in a minute to Caleb and Chris, and they're going to talk about a couple of next steps. I think there's a real art to having school leaders or municipal leaders figure out how to take what they're hearing from the community, put it together with some of the constraints they face, and create something new from all of that. And when it's done well, it's really powerful. So I will turn it over to Caleb and Krista to talk about next steps. But before I do that, I just have one more thing that I want to really encourage you to do as you're leaving tonight. And so over here, this is your evaluation of the meeting, and it's super easy. Just put an X along this line that says how you think the meeting went. And if you have some general comments, you can put them there. And there's two other opportunities to just write your thoughts. One has to do with what topics you would like to discuss if we did another forum like this. What would you like to be talking about? And then the other one are specific suggestions for future community engagement in forums like this. So on your way out, if you can weigh in on those things, that would be awesome. And just make sure to leave your other things right on the table. We'll collect those at the end. And with that, I'm turning it over to somebody.
I guess can I just stay here?
Yeah.
So I'm totally with you, Vanessa, and I want to know what to do next too. But so working with Sue and our committee has been great because it's really helped us to try to frame what is a huge conversation, and this really is the first step. But we've committed within our community engagement committee to have some specific next steps that we can share with you guys right at the outset. And so on October 30th, we have our next full board meeting. So we'll be busy transcribing all of the frequently asked questions and feedback and themes from tonight to share with the full board. And at the same time, our superintendent, Patrick Green, is going to be sharing that with his leadership team. So, so that's the very first next step. And then we'll need a little breathing time. But then within 2 weeks, we hope to put out that same information to the community. So to everyone here, but also to all the people that weren't able to be here. Sharing all of the good work that's come out of this evening, and then inviting further input, especially for people that weren't here. And then I believe Caleb mentioned that our committee meets or tries to meet monthly, and so we have a lot to reflect on and to think about after we synthesize all this feedback and think about how tonight went, and figure out what we do next. Is it another event? Is it a survey? What is it that we're going to do to keep the momentum going, because that's really the idea. And there are lots of different issues that I think are really pressing for our community around education. So, I don't think we'll have a shortage of things to talk about, but we'll hopefully have a deliberative way to have those conversations. So those are our next steps, but I also just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out, especially thank you to Sue for working with us. Thank you to the 5 community groups. And brainstorm and think beyond just this typical school board role about how to make this kind of event work. Caleb, do you want to answer that?
Well, it's more of a housekeeping thing. For anybody who didn't put their name and email out front, there was a little sign-up sheet. In case you missed it, please put it down, because there will be multiple ways of getting information back to you, but we'd love to be able to email everybody here tonight as at least one of our steps of reaching back with some of this synthesized info. So please just remember to do that on your way out if you have not.
And then I remembered the thing that I forgot, which was to say that we will do our very best to keep in mind the many events happening in our community. And you're right, Tom, it was a big miss, and that was really unfortunate. But we really hope to have other opportunities to bring people out, and even to spotlight student music and art and just all the great things that are happening, so we can remember that this is what this is for and about. So, yeah, so have a little faith in that process if you can. Is that all we have?
Thank you.
I think that's it.